I wonder if Luke did not have some special meaning when he wrote, "There was no room in the inn," but specifically that there was no room for them in the inn. We cannot be certain, but it is my guess that money could talk in those days as well as in our own. I think if Joseph and Mary had been people of influence or means, they would have found lodging, even at that busy time of year. We cannot be certain what this historian intended, but we do know that these two were desperately poor. At the purification offering which the parents made after the child's birth, a turtle dove was substituted for the required lamb, a substitution the Lord had allowed in the law of Moses to ease the burden of the truly impoverished. The wise men did come later, bearing gifts, adding some splendor and wealth to this occasion, but it is important to note that they came from a distance, probably Prussia, a trip of several hundred miles at the very least. Unless they started long before the star appeared, it is highly unlikely that they arrived on the night of the babe's birth. Indeed, Matthew records that when they came, Jesus was a young child, and the family was living in a house. Perhaps this provides an important distinction that we should remember in our own holiday season. Maybe the purchasing and the making and the wrapping and the decorating, those delightfully generous and important expressions of our love at Christmas, should be separated, if only slightly, from the more quiet, personal moments when we consider the meaning of the baby and his birth, who prompts the giving of such gifts. As happens so often, if we are not careful, the symbols can cover that which is symbolized. In some of our lives, the manger has already been torn down to allow for a discount store running 3 for $1 specials on gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I do not feel or mean this to sound like modern-day Scrooge. The gold, frankincense, and myrrh were humbly given and appreciatively received. And so they should be, every year and always. As my wife and children can testify, no one gets more giddy about giving and receiving of presents than I do. But for that very reason, I, like you, need to remember that the very plain scene, even of poverty, of a night devoid of tinsel or wrapping or goods of this world, only when we see that single, sacred, unadorned object of our devotion, the babe of Bethlehem, will we know why this 'tis the season to be jolly, and why the giving of gifts is so appropriate. As a father, I've recently begun to think more often about Joseph, that strong, silent, almost unknown man who must have been more worthy than any other mortal man to be the guiding, foster father of the living Son of God. It was Joseph selected from among all men who would teach Jesus to work. It was Joseph who taught him the books of the law. It was Joseph who in that seclusion of the shop helped him began to understand who he was and ultimately what he was to become. I was a student at BYU just finishing my first year of graduate work when our first child, a son, was born. We were very poor, though not as poor as Joseph and Mary. My wife and I were both going to school, both holding jobs, in addition working as a head resident in an off-campus apartment complex to help defray our rent. We drove a little Volkswagen which had a half-dead battery because we couldn't afford a new one, the Volkswagen or the battery. Nevertheless, when I realized that our own night of nights was coming, I believe I would have done any honorable thing in this world and mortgaged any future I had to make sure my wife had the clean sheets, the sterile utensils, the attentive nurses, and the skilled doctors who brought forth our firstborn son. If she or that child had needed special care at the Mayo Clinic, I believe I would have ransomed my very life to get it. I compare those feelings, which I had with each succeeding child, with what Joseph must have felt as he moved through the streets of a city not his own, with not a friend or a kinsman in sight, not anyone willing to extend a helping hand. In these very last and most painful hours of her confinement, Mary had ridden or walked approximately 100 miles from Nazareth to Galilee to Bethlehem to Judea. Surely Joseph must have wept at her silent courage. Now alone and unnoticed, they had to descend from human company to a stable, a grotto full of animals, there to bring forth the Son of God. I wonder what emotions Joseph must have had as he cleared away the dung and the debris. I wonder if he felt the sting of tears as he hurriedly tried to find the cleanest straw and hold the animals back. I wonder if he wondered, could there be a more unhealthy, a more disease-ridden, a more despicable circumstance in which a child could be born? Is this the place fit for a king? Should the mother of the Son of God be asked to enter the valley of the shadow of death in such a foul and unfamiliar place as this? Is it wrong to wish her some comfort? Is it right he should be born here? But I am certain Joseph did not mutter and Mary did not wail. They knew a great deal, and did the best that they could. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and she laid him in a manger. Those brief pronouns trumpet in our ears, that second only to the child himself. Mary is the chiefest figure, the regal queen, the mother of mothers, holding center stage to the grandest of all dramatic moments. And those same pronouns also trumpet that, save for her beloved husband, she was very much alone. I've wondered if this young woman, something of a child herself, here bearing her first baby, might have wished her mother or an aunt or a sister or friend to be nearer through this labor. Surely the birth of such a son as this should command the aid and attention of every midwife in Judea. We all might wish that someone could have held her hand, cooled her brow when the ordeal was over, given her rest in a crisp, cool linen. But it was not so. Only with Joseph, inexperienced assistance, she herself brought forth her firstborn son, wrapped him in the little clothes she had knowingly brought on her journey, and perhaps laid him on a pillow of hay. At this focal point of all human history, a point illuminated by a new star in the heavens, revealed for such a purpose, probably no other mortal watched, none but a poor young carpenter, a beautiful virgin mother, and silent stabled animals who had not the power to utter the sacredness they had seen. Shepherds would soon arrive, and later wise men from the east. Later yet, the memory of that night would bring Santa Claus and Frosty and Rudolph, and all would be welcome. But first and forever, there was just a little family without toys or tinsels or trees, with a baby. That's how Christmas began.